You can tell a lot about a leader by looking at their feet during times of crisis, chaos, and when they're charged with taking their team to the next level. Today, not only am I going to show you my feet, but I'm going to show you how to make any change stick beyond the boardroom by showing yours too. Whether you're a leader, future leader, and you're here listening, if you don't remember anything else I say today, remember that if you have a big vision and a big goal and you want lasting success, the only way that you can achieve it is doing one thing, and that is changing so that you can collaborate with others in a way that moves you closer to your goals and not further away from it. So whether you are implementing a new project, restructuring a department, or doing anything that impacts other humans, the only vehicle that you can use to safely get you from here, where you are, to there, where you're going, is people. And that is why change management is so important. Without it, many organizations experience what I call a crash: customer dissatisfaction, revenue loss, an awful culture, staff turnover, and then hindered results. Any of that sound familiar to you? A crash is simply when a driver or a leader is unable to move forward for one reason or another, or they are moving forward slower than they have the capacity to do so. Let me tell you what this looks like. Have you ever implemented a new initiative only to find out that 6 months later, the great strategy that was mapped out in the boardroom has not been executed, or no one is doing things a new way? That's because change is hard. I don't even like having to drive a new way home when there's construction, so I definitely don't like having to relearn something that I thought I was already an expert at. I find myself in those moments yelling out to Siri, "I don't want an alternate route. The old one is working just fine." Did you know that 70% of projects fail because of employees yelling out that very same thing during times of uncertainty? We've always done it this way. I don't want a new way. The old one is working just fine. And sometimes you're forced to change not because of an internal initiative, but because of external circumstances that are beyond your control. Think about the COVID-19 pandemic, how it impacted not just people, but businesses. From social distancing to essential workers, to remote work, remote school, leaders had to both pivot and be proactive at the same time. And many had to close their doors. We had the Great Resignation, or the Great Reshuffling, however you look at it, where millions of people left their job, disrupting just about every industry out there. And then we had the high interest rates and the soaring gas prices. And the absolute worst of all, the chicken wing shortage. And let's not talk about school closures and childcare. My son, who was 2 at the time, was with us when everything shut down. And I thought, wow, 8 years to have him, 4 rounds of IVF. This is going to be pleasant and playful to have him at home. We're going to have more time. But instead, it was pandemonium. He was running and jumping off of everything. I had to save his life every single day. And to top it all off, he broke my phones, cracked my screen, and the only way I knew it was him is because the evidence you see behind you. Frame by frame by frame, he caught it on tape. And then one particular day, he had a complete meltdown because I cut his peanut butter and jelly sandwich in half, and he wanted it whole. So I took this picture just to illustrate to you that people don't like change. Not kids, not adults, no one. It sends us on an emotional roller coaster. As human beings, we like to be comfortable. Don't they look comfortable? But if you stare long enough, it looks like they're looking straight ahead saying, "You are lucky, this plush blanket is so soft, otherwise we would be fighting." It is the leader's responsibility to be like that blanket, to strategize and communicate so well that despite the disruption to their employees' day-to-day operations, they can still work with little to no friction. And this is when knowing what to do with your feet becomes so important, because the questions will come, and you must be prepared. Your employees will ask questions and make comments and say, "This doesn't make sense. Why are we even doing this?" They'll say things like, "This is the first I've heard of it. Why didn't you communicate sooner? We don't have the time nor the resources. Did you even consider how this was going to impact my job?" And these are very valid questions. But many leaders, instead of answering the question, respond like this. Tapping. But how do you know if your leader is tapping? Well, first, look at their feet. No, when a leader is tap dancing, they don't answer the question. They don't communicate well, and the employees end up feeling as if the change is happening to them and not with them. I remember I learned how to tap dance a few years ago, not literally, because as you can see from my fancy footwork right there, I am just a beginner. But I learned to tap around issues. Earlier in my career, before I started my own business, I was working as a leader at a company, and everything was going great. I was maintaining a 97% customer satisfaction rating. I was 150% over my sales goal. Our culture was great. And because of that, we were retaining our talent, and people didn't want to leave, and therefore we were crushing our goals. And then something happened. We started acquiring companies, 3 to be exact. And I'll be honest, the very first acquisition, I did not know what to do. And even though I was charged with integrating their team into ours, I was confused. So I did what any leader would do. Here's what we're doing, and y'all are just going to fall in line. But that didn't work. Here is actual footage of both teams working together under my leadership initially. And I was not a blanket. It was a fight to get anything done, a fight to get progress, a fight to do anything. And I recognized that it was time for me to change. I wanted things my way because, after all, I was right. But there was one problem. I had to convince everyone else of that. Well, there were 2 problems. I needed to change my approach. We were headed towards a crash, and I was feeling the pressure. The tap dancing didn't work, and I quickly realized that driving change is often like driving a car that overheats. You can only go but so far until you have to stop and let it cool off. And as leaders, sometimes we're so much in a rush that we don't take the time to slow down, reassess, reevaluate, so we can understand the next best move before we make it. But I didn't have a choice. I had to make a change, so I developed a change management framework that would allow me to avoid future resistance, hopefully. And it worked. The next 2 acquisitions that we went through were a lot smoother. But I still had another dilemma. What was I going to call this framework? How was I going to explain it to other people? You guessed it. This is the part where I show you my feet. I bet you didn't think when I said that earlier today that I was actually going to take my shoes off. And neither did the executives several years back when I took my shoes off before a presentation in the boardroom. But I had to. Listen, these were the type of shoes I had on. And I had been walking around in them the entire day, and the meeting was like at 3 o'clock. My feet were burning. They were hurting so bad, I didn't know whether to take my shoes off or keep them on. And ladies who wear heels all day, you know exactly what I'm talking about, when the soles of your feet start burning. And I said to myself, the only way that I can be productive in this meeting is if I take my shoes off. But then I thought to myself, what are they going to think about me? What if they don't listen? What if they don't think I'm professional enough? I was the only woman and the only black woman, and I'm like, what if they think I'm ghetto for taking my shoes off? And then I said, you know what? You have been asked to present because of your expertise. None of that other stuff matters. It is better to do something that is out of the ordinary and get results than to stay in unnecessary pain and get nowhere. You see, you cannot lead anyone beyond your capacity to lead. And the way you lead is determined by what you do with your feet. So I took my shoes off, gave the presentation, shared the data, and of course, I crushed it as usual, And one of the executives looked at me and said, Shara, you're barefoot in the boardroom. That's a book title. And I was like, you are absolutely right. I've been waiting for a name for my framework. And at that moment, I knew that I was going to call it the Barefoot Method. Because in order to drive change that sticks, you have to break out of the norms into the new. You have to assess your readiness for the change. You have to reposition people and processes as needed. You have to execute even though sometimes you feel the paralysis of analysis. You have to follow up for accountability. You have to operationalize the change in order to make it part of the day-to-day. You have to look for new opportunities for innovation. And you have to establish a timeline so people know what to do and by when. You see, with change management, projects are more likely to end on time and under budget and have people who are not willing to leave and they want to stay around and help you bring that change to pass. With change management, leaders are able to accomplish more. And when you do what you're supposed to do with your feet, it makes all the difference in the world. So I'm going to leave you with this. Whenever you're given a seat at the table, don't sit, stand. And for all the leaders and future leaders out there, if you want to drive change that sticks and you want to get through chaos and you want to get through conflict and you want to take your team to the next level, be selfless. It's not always about you. Be tactful. It's not what you say, sometimes it's how you say it. Be aware of how the change impacts others. Be nimble. Everything doesn't always go as planned. Sometimes it's better to be flexible and be productive than to stand still. Be daring. Be daring enough to be bold, to speak up. Sometimes you may be the only one with the answer, and if you are silent, things may stay the same. Stand for growth. Stand for change. Stand for what's right. Stand for what you believe in. Stand barefoot in the boardroom. Thank you.